Hello, everybody. We're here today to talk about real-time medical applications for developers. As a little bit of background, this presentation was really hard to prepare for. There's lots of different types of applications represented here at PlumCon: care applications, scribes, agents, co-pilots, AI automations, intake, telephony, patient apps, mobile apps, just a lot of different use cases. And if we slice across a shared experience, this real-time theme emerges, which is why Derek and Maddie have prepared this presentation. We believe that dev knowledge of real-time and healthcare will enable that next level of applications that will shape the future. So we have two heavy hitters here with incredible experience in this domain, Derek and Maddie, who have built real-time apps and live the real-time life and are here to tell the story. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Derek, and I'm a core engineer on the Medplum team. And I worked on a lot of these features that enable real-time applications to be built on top of Medplum. And Maddie?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Maddie. I'm a member of the forward deployed engineering team here at Medplum. And I have worked with Derek and many of our customers to deploy these features for real time. Take a step back from real time and to talk about the larger healthcare ecosystem. We want to ask ourselves, what are some of the biggest problems in healthcare delivery today? And I've included a few examples on the screen, but given that this is PlumCon and a developer conference and likely a developer audience, we want to ask ourselves, what are some of the biggest problems in healthcare delivery today that developers can influence? And we would like to argue through this talk and also generally that the largest problem that developers can influence in healthcare delivery today is regarding delays in information. So what are delays in information and what causes delays in information? Delays in information are really any time in which information exists in one part of the healthcare ecosystem and is not easily accessible in another part of the ecosystem, often requiring someone to perform some kind of manual intervention in order to make that information available. For example, here on screen, you can see pagers, faxes, CD-ROMs, where someone has to manually type something in order for information to be delivered. Even whiteboards where information has to be broadcast by someone manually writing something on a board or erasing it from the board. This is a little bit abstract, so we want to ground this talk today inside of an example story here. This example story is regarding Paul, the patient. Paul is a 52-year-old male who has a fall while mountain biking. He has a broken wrist and a possible concussion, and he's in a remote region. An ambulance picks him up from that remote place, and the EMT is tending to Paul. And while in that ambulance ride, the EMT has to call an ER routing center and verbally describe Paul's condition to that ER routing center. That ER routing center will then call an intake nurse at a hospital, and that intake nurse will manually enter Paul's information into an EHR. Upon entering that information, the intake nurse will say, yes, we can treat Paul inside of these facilities. And that nurse will then have to check a whiteboard in order to determine whether or not there's a bed available for Paul once he arrives. Then Paul is ushered to the hospital, and once he's there, an ER doctor will take a look at Paul and page the radiology department in order to order a scan for Paul's broken wrist. The radiology tech will then perform that scan and then have to fax a copy of that scan to the ER doctor as well as to the radiology department for that kind of final review. Once again, a manual intervention of faxing. However, then the doctor will then see a simple break, and assuming that the scan is otherwise routine, that doctor will apply a cast to Paul and discharge Paul from the hospital. However, the radiologist still needs to perform a final review of this scan. And that radiologist does not get around to that review until a few hours after Paul is discharged because this scan is assumed to be otherwise routine. However, a few hours after discharge, the radiologist does the review and then notices some unusual bone density and growth, which is considered to be a critical result. The radiology, just then seeing this critical result, calls the ER doctor, who informs the radiologist that Paul has actually been discharged from the hospital. The radiologist will then need to track down and call Paul's primary care doctor in order to ensure that Paul makes it back to the hospital for those follow-up scans. Upon contacting Paul, they're able to schedule an appointment for Paul the following week. Paul returns the following week to the hospital, and that unusual bone density and growth is determined to be benign after Paul gets those follow-up scans. However, we think Paul has suffered needlessly through the weekend. He's been told that he has some unusual critical results and that he needs to come back to the hospital and suffers from anxiety because of that. And so, looking at this kind of story here, we ask ourselves, did any of the human actors inside this scenario do anything wrong? We would argue not at all. All the human actors did everything to the best of the knowledge and information they had available at that time. However, how did Paul's care team share that information? We would argue that they had to do a lot of manual intervention in order to do so. For example, phone calls, faxes, pages, things like that. And this leads to information silos across the hospital system. As you can see on this diagram right here, there's an information silo between kind of the ER and the EHR that the ER is using, as well as the radiology systems. And these silos exist within EHR, across radiology departments and EHRs, labs, pharmacies, all kinds of areas inside of the system. So how do these information silos affect care? It results in a lack of shared context. It creates a lot of communication overhead and generally delays care and increases costs for the hospital systems. And we can actually help eliminate, as developers, these information silos. And with that, I will hand it over to Derek.
Yeah. So in regards to these information silos, we think that real time is the solution here. So how can we bring real-time features to legacy healthcare IT systems today? Well, Medplum provides a few different features that enable real-time applications. We have FHIR WebSocket subscriptions, which allows for Medplum server to push notifications to client applications about updates to FHIR resources, be it patients, imaging study, diagnostic reports, or any other type of FHIR resource. We also have FHIRCast, which was just recently added to and now supported by Epic, which enables real-time synchronization of radiology systems. If you're in the radiology space, you've probably heard of PACS, you've probably heard of Scribes. All these disparate systems currently use bespoke integrations, and FHIRCast is now an open standard that allows different radiology applications to communicate with each other. And this also allows AI actors to now participate in these radiology workflows. And lastly, we have the Medplum agent, which enables synchronization between real-time and legacy applications via HL7v2 messages. So if you're in the medical space, you've probably heard of HL7v2 at some point. This is the de facto standard for legacy systems, and Medplum agent provides a bridge to those legacy systems via an interface that consumes HL7v2 and can operate on FHIR. So we see here that a lot of these real-time features exist in applications that we use every day. We see in Google Docs, we have presence in the top right here, where the icon is indicating who's currently looking at the document. We see live edits happening in real time as the person is typing. And if we look at Slack, we can see that there's push notifications, as we talked about earlier with FHIR WebSocket subscriptions. And then we also have presence here with the so-and-so is typing indicator. All these features have been around for at least a decade, and Medplum is now finally bringing them to the healthcare ecosystem. So we're going to take another look at Paul's story again. And Paul is still a 52-year-old male, still had a broken wrist and a possible concussion. However, now with Medplum, we can see that the EMT is able to look at a live dashboard, as we see on the right here. And this EMT is able to see what the bed availability of the hospitals before they even call in. And then when the EMT goes to enter Paul's information into this application, an HL7 ADT is emitted to the hospital's legacy system. And Paul's information is already there with like a pre-admit before Paul even arrives at the ER. And then at the ER Rounding Center, we have the same app set up, which is consuming live ADT feeds from the legacy system. And that's what enables this live dashboard, as well as these push notifications that we see in the bottom right here, where we see ER9 is now available, which is one of the rooms in the ER. So then when Paul finally does get to the ER, he doesn't have to go through the whole check-in process. Most of his information has already been taken by the EMT. And then when he arrives in the ER, another HL7 message is automatically generated, ordering the scan for Paul's broken wrist. Finally, when Paul gets to radiology, the rad tech performs the scan, and the scan is automatically broadcast via another HL7 message via that Medplum agent. And then the rad tech actually opens the scan in a PAC system, and an AI connected to the FHIRCast context that we talked about earlier actually identifies this critical result that we talked about earlier, or at least an anomaly in the scan. And it emits a push notification telling the ER doctor to keep Paul in the ER before Paul leaves and to let the radiologist do his review first. So now let's go to the radiologist. The radiologist is now immediately notified to take a look at Paul's scan before Paul even leaves. And the radiologist sees the anomaly, makes a note in the report, and as soon as the radiologist closes the report, a push notification is sent out to the ER doctor with the critical findings, as we see here in the GIF. And the ER doctor then, as a result, orders more scans for Paul. Paul's scans are completed, and before Paul even leaves, Paul is notified that his growth is actually benign. And we've avoided all this headache for Paul over the weekend, all this anxiety. And his follow-up is scheduled automatically via an HL7 integration with the primary care doctor. So all this to say that Paul was in a lot less anxiety in the situation just because of the real-time information that was available. So yes, the solution for the delay, we say, is real time. We've removed all the silos that we saw earlier. So now the EHR, whenever the doctor goes to order the scan, the EHR emits an HL7v2 message via the Medplum agent to the RIS system. When the radiologist completes his report, the radiologist PAC sends the EHR the report via FHIRCast, and that triggers a push notification via WebSocket subscriptions to the doctor, notifying the doctor of the result. So in this case, we've done a complete integration. There are no more silos in the system. So how do we take a legacy system to real time? Well, the majority of it is really in these 3 lines of code here. So as we can see, this is a Medplum React hook called use subscription. This enables you to use WebSocket subscriptions with very little cognitive overhead. So we just have FHIR subscription criteria string here. In this case, we're looking for diagnostic reports with the status set to final and the category of radiology. And whenever we get those reports, we're going to do something with them. In this case, creating a push notification to the doctor.
Yeah, so to pick it up here and to recap kind of Paul's 2 different outcomes, one in the legacy system and one with real-time enablement. I want to do a quick comparison of the before and after of Paul's story, the before being on the left side here and the after being on the right. Just quickly going down both sides. On the left, in the before scenario, you see a lot of manual entry, use of whiteboards, use of calling, pages, faxes, and generally just ill-fated results for Paul. And on the right side here, you can see that with AI scribes and live HL7 feeds, we're able to allow Paul to be better taken care of before he even leaves the hospital. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that AI scribes can be a good big part of your system, or I should say, one thing I want to mention here too is that AI agents can also be enabled with real time. Real time allows you to keep the information context that is needed for AI agents as up to date as possible and allows those AI agents to be proper actors inside of the system. Going back and forth again on the before and after, on the left side here, you can see that this legacy system resulted in Paul needing to return to the hospital and cost the hospital more resources, as well as causing Paul some anxiety. On the right, you can see that Paul is able to be cleared more quickly, saving the hospital resources and allowing Paul to save on his anxiety as well. Once again, just to recap, why does real-time matter in healthcare? It allows collaborators to engage with the latest possible information at any given moment. It also creates a shared context amongst team members and eliminates a lot of these information silos that causes delay. In general, it also reduces communication overhead. Instead of needing doctors to page people, fax people, call people, they can spend more time at the patient's bedside. And it also enables AI actors to assist human collaborators in these systems. As some food for thought, I want to share too, how are some of our customers using real-time applications today? I've included a few examples here on the right side. Real-time bed availability at a hub-and-spoke rural hospital system, with kind of the example that we had earlier with that live ADT feed going into the ER beds. This product will actually be open source shortly, so look out for that. We also have AI-based prioritization of customer support messages, where essentially customers and patients can message in these support channels. And if they're reporting nausea or side effects or potentially critical results, those messages can be surfaced to the clinical team faster. Generally, we also just see a transformation in how spoken or previously shared information can be created into charting or documentation. This can range from ambient scribes, generally a big topic these days, to even just be able to pre-fill in questionnaires for patients. And then lastly, we also have this example of in-house lab connectivity and real-time synchronization. This is where we have real-time synchronizations of results from the accession device that is reading the blood samples into the EHR directly, so there's no delay between when the device has the information and when the doctor can view it. And with that, thank you all for listening to our talk on real-time applications today.